everybody. Welcome to Keys to the Kingdom. I'm Marissa, and I hope you guys are having a happy Tuesday. We are finishing up our Leviticus study today. This is going to be the end of Leviticus and all those terrible laws that they just needed to be done away with. Thank goodness they were not done away with in reality. But we are in Leviticus 22 through 27 today. And after we finish up with Leviticus, we'll just go right on into Numbers, and we'll continue on throughout the Bible until we're through the entire thing. It will probably take us a long time, but that's okay. But it was very important that we start at the beginning. A couple years ago, we started in Genesis. We got through Exodus, and we are now finishing up Leviticus. I was not doing videos or studies for a long time, so there was probably like, I don't know, 8 or 9 months that we didn't do any studying. But now we're back in the Word, and Leviticus is important to know. These are the laws of God. These were the instructions of God. Maybe we should just say instructions, because Torah actually means teaching and instruction. So, some people, they hear the word law and they immediately get turned off. Like, oh, God has laws. God has teachings and instructions, just like any parent has teachings and instructions on how they want their children to live and prosper and be happy and do the right things. So why should God be any different that he has teachings and instructions? Good morning, Marissa. And it says Facebook user. I'm not sure who that is, so I can't say hi to you. Sorry. There's no picture and there's no name, but blessings to you too. So yeah, it was important for us to go through the book of Leviticus, piece by piece, and really take a magnifying glass and say, is there any laws in here that needed to be done away with? Since that's what Christianity teaches, is that the laws were done away with. In fact, they say that Yeshua nailed the laws to the cross. And it never says that in the Brit Hadashah, which is the Newer Testament. Never says that. It says he nailed our sins to the cross. But nonetheless, that is what they teach. And if anybody ever says that to you, just ask them very politely, do you mind showing me which laws Yeshua did away with? Do you mind telling me which ones do not apply today and which ones do apply? Because I'm curious which ones you have a problem with. If you really look at it and you don't beat around the bush. I mean, obviously, Christians don't believe in eating blood. They don't believe in sleeping with family. They don't believe in inappropriate sexual relations. The main issues that they have a problem with all boil down to the changing of the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, which was changed by the Catholic Church. And it's interesting because Christianity prides itself on coming out of the Catholic Church. Protestantism, got away from Catholicism, and then, baptism got away from Protestantism, or I don't know, they broke away from each other. And they keep thinking like, we broke away from all the, idolatry that's in Catholicism because they still worship like many, many saints, more than you ever see. And they've got statues of them everywhere. But Christianity as a whole typically prides itself on coming out of this entity that itself changed a lot of God's laws, particularly the Sabbath and God's holy feast days, and replace them with Sunday and then other, pagan holidays. But just ask them, which laws, do you mind showing me which laws Yeshua did away with? And hopefully you can look at it with them, and maybe they will gain some understanding just by asking them that question. All right, so this is the last part of Leviticus. We're going to go ahead and start in chapter 22. I'm going to bring the scriptures up on the screen so you can follow along. And Okay, so right here in Leviticus 22, chapter 1, I'm sorry, chapter 22, verse 1, it says, Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, Tell Aaron and his sons to separate themselves from the holy things of Bnei Israel, which they consecrate to me, so that they will not profane my holy name. I am Yahuwah. Tell them, if any one of all your offspring throughout your generations approaches the holy things which Israel consecrate to Yahuwah, while in a state of uncleanliness, so anything that was consecrated to God, they were not supposed to approach any of the holy things while they were in a state of uncleanliness. Anything that was considered holy. That soul will be cut off from before me. I am Yahuwah. None of the offspring of Aaron who has zarat, which was leprosy, or has a discharge, should eat any of the holy things until he is clean. Whoever touches anything that is unclean by the dead, or a man whose seed discharges from him, or who touches any creeping thing that may make him unclean, or a person who is an unclean, whatever his uncleanliness, the person who touches any such thing will be unclean until the evening. And it is not to eat of the holy things unless he has bathed his body in water. I want to point out something here. Just very quickly. Really quick, I want to point out something here. You'll see throughout Leviticus, it says, you'll be unclean until evening unless you bathed. Unless you bathe. And I think we really take it for granted, the fact that they're in the wilderness, and even when they were in Israel, it's not like we have baths today where we just shower every day. This was not something that was particularly easy for them in the wilderness, where they had to use water, and water was scarce. Okay, so they had to bathe unless, there weren't even any bodies of water around. So they were getting water from rocks, remember? So I just want you to keep in mind the time that this is written. This is not like, say, oh, just go take a shower like it is today. This is like a whole process of somebody having to bathe and using up water resources that were very scarce in the wilderness. Just bear in mind those things when you're reading the word, because we read it as if it's today, and it's so far from our culture. Probably even 100 years ago, they would have a better conceptualization of what was going on, just because we've come so far in the last 100 years, with technology and just having everything that we need. We don't read the scriptures in the context that it was written in, or the culture that it was in, the time that it was written in. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so unless he has bathed his body in water. When the sun sets, he will become clean, and afterwards he may eat of the holy things, because it is his food. So these are the sons of Aaron that he's referring to, okay? A carcass, or what is torn by beasts, he is not to eat, becoming unclean by it. I am Yahuwah. Therefore, Kohanim, or the priests, should keep my charge, so that they do not become guilty of sin and die should they profane it. When he says here, again, I want you to see here, when God says sin, see, this is what's so difficult about the English language as opposed to reading this in Hebrew. People think of sin as like, oh, you're just a bad person. You're a sinner. When God says sin, the word sin, to sin in Hebrew is the thought of missing the mark. And it means to do that which is not, it means to miss the mark, but in reference to clean and unclean, it has to do with, I just lost my train of thought. It has to do with being fit for whatever you're doing. So when God says here, which verse is it? When he says here in verse 9 that therefore the priest should keep my charges so that they do not become guilty of sin and die should they profane it. Again, like I've been reiterating in these videos, God was trying to dwell with his people. He was allowing a portion of himself, a physical manifestation of himself, to dwell with his people. Okay? But in order to do that, there was certain protocols that they had to follow, otherwise they could die. It wasn't God killing them. It was just the simple fact that you had to do this and you had to do that and you couldn't do these things, otherwise you would die in his presence. So that's what he means by becoming guilty of sin. And I just have to point that out, because when we read this, we think, oh, I'm guilty of sin and I'm just going to die. And this is why people look at these scriptures in the Old Testament and they think God is, angry, vengeful. He was just killing people. It didn't have to do with that. He wasn't killing people. He was telling them how to survive in his presence. That's what he was telling them what to do. Because that's why he says, because I am God. When he says, because I am Yahuwah, he says this throughout almost all of the teachings and instructions, the laws that are given in Leviticus. He says, you'll see at the end, for I am Yahuwah, I am Yahuwah, I am Yahuwah, I am Yahuwah. This proves my point. It's because he is who he is that you could die in his presence, and why you had to follow these instructions while dealing with holy things these holy things had his spiritual charge, so to speak, in a sense that if you touched it, you could die if you were not clean. Okay? So I like to just re-point that out, because see, it says, I am Yahuwah who sanctifies them. Okay? He's sanctifying them so that they could stand in his presence. Okay? And that's what God's doing with us. See, that's the whole point of salvation, is so that after we're supposedly, although some would argue that you're not really saved yet, but that once you start walking with God, once you're saved, it doesn't stop there. Then you're constantly on this trajectory of being sanctified by Yahuwah. Now in verse 10 it says, no layman is to eat from the holy offering. A foreigner living with the Kohanim or a hired servant is not to eat from the holy offering. The holy offering was only supposed to be eaten by the sons of Aaron. But if a Kohanim buys a slave purchased by his own money, that one may eat from it. Also, those born in his house may eat his food. So if he buys a slave, they may eat from it, because this is how the Kohanim survived and had their food, because they did not have any property. The Levites were not giving a portion in the land of Israel. All the other tribes were given a portion of land, but the Levites were within each tribe serving as priests. So it was by the offerings of Israel that they lived on. Because the portion for Levi and the house of Levi and the priests and everything, their portion was God. So it says, if a Cohen's daughter is married to a layman, she is not to eat from the gifts of the holy offerings. But if a Cohen's daughter is a widow or divorced and has no child and has returned to her father's house as in her youth, she may eat from her father's food, but no layman may eat of it. If anyone eats something holy unwittingly, then he is to add a fifth to it and give the holy offering to the Cohen. They are not to profane the holy offerings of Bnei Israel, which they lift up to Yahuwah. so causing them to bear the iniquity that brings guilt when they eat the holy offerings. For I am Yahuwah who sanctifies them. He established a priesthood for himself. And these offerings were for them and not for outsiders. All right, so verse 17, these are acceptable offerings. Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, and to all Bnei Israel, and say to them, whoever is from the house of Israel, or one of the outsiders in Israel who brings his offering, whether it be any of their vows or any of their free will offerings that they present to Yahuwah for a burnt offering, for you to be accepted, you are to offer a male without blemish from the bulls, the sheep, or the goats." Okay, so it says, whoever is of the house of Israel, or one of the outsiders in Israel who brings his offering, whether it be any of their vows or any of their free will offerings that they present as a burnt offering, for you to be accepted, you're to offer a male without blemish from the bulls, the sheep, or the goats. Okay, so those were the three. But whatever has a blemish you are not to present, for it will not be accepted on your behalf. You had to present a perfect offering. Your goat, your sheep, your ox, it could not have a defect. So your offering had to be a spotless offering. Whoever brings a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to Yahuwah is to fulfill a vow or for a free will offering, either from the herd or the flock. It must be unblemished to be accepted. There must be no defect on it. The blind, injured, maimed, having an abnormal growth or festering or running sore is not to be offered to Yahuwah or given as any offering by fire on the altar. Okay, so first of all, let's think about this. Why no growth or sore or maimed or injured? Of course somebody would want to offer that animal because that animal is not doing well and they can afford to lose it. They can afford to lose it, so of course that would be ideal. But let's look at this a little bit closer. Don't you think Yahuwah is also looking out for the priests who are going to be eating this food? They are the ones that are eating because of the offerings. That's where their food came from, okay? Their meat anyway. And Yahuwah's not going to allow them to eat a sick animal, okay? Because then they could become unclean, and this is the priesthood that's supposed to be totally clean to stand before Yahuwah in the tabernacle, okay, and to do all of these duties. So that's number one. And then secondly, God doesn't want if you're giving God your leftovers and you're just not giving him your best, that doesn't say much for the person that's giving it to God. They're kind of giving half-heartedly. Okay, so this says here, whatever has its testicles bruised, crushed, broken, or cut, you are not to offer it to Yahuwah, nor are you to do so in your own land. Moreover, you are not to offer the food of your God from the hand of an outsider from any of these animals, for their corruption is within them. They have a defect. They will not be accepted on your behalf. So that's interesting. It says, you're not to offer the food of your God from the hand of an outsider from any of these animals, for their corruption is within them. They have a defect. He's saying that outside animals are going to have a defect, and they cannot be accepted. Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, when a bull, sheep, or goat is born, then it is to remain 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day onward it will be accepted as the gift of an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. If it is a cow or an ewe, you are not to slaughter it along with its young, both in 1 day. So basically, if they just if you have a cow or an ewe, you're not to slaughter it with its young both in the same day. Because they just gave birth. When you offer a sacrifice, and I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the fact that something is going on inside of the sheep or the cow after it delivers, kind of like the laws that pertain to women bleeding after they give birth. But this says 7 days with its mother. When you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to Yahuwah, you are to present it so that you may be accepted. It is to be eaten on the same day. You are to leave none of it until the morning. I am Yahuwah. You are to keep my mitzvot, which are my commandments, and do them. I am Yahuwah. You are not to profane my holy name, for I will be made holy among Israel. I am Yahuwah, who makes you holy, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Yahuwah. All right, so let's see. Chapter 23. All right, guys, chapter 23. This is very important. One of my favorite chapters. Not that I should have any favorites, but the reason chapter 23 is important because these have all of God's holy days. This has the Sabbath. This has the all of the feast days and the directions on how to celebrate them. If Christians could rip out Leviticus 23, that's basically what they've done. They've just ripped this entire page out. This entire chapter is written out. Just ripped out. Because, again, they don't think you should... There's a lot of laws that Christians follow in the Torah that might not even be mentioned in the New Testament, but yet they follow them anyway. Why are these not important to Christians today? Other than the fact that they misinterpret certain scriptures in the New Testament, thinking that explains it, but, there's a whole chapter dedicated in Leviticus to these feast days. So it says, the feasts of the Lord. Pay careful attention to this chapter. Always remember Leviticus 23 whenever the feast days are coming up so that you can refer back to the instructions and what God said to do during those times. It says, then Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Israel and tell them, these are the appointed Moedim of Yahuwah, which you are to proclaim to be holy convocations, my Moedim. Moedim are appointed times. They're set apart times. They're holy. It says holy convocations. These are holy, set apart times. They're not just some days that God gave to the Jews. First of all, there was lots of different tribes other than Jews. And God also says in previous chapters that the same law applies to Israel as the native as it does to the stranger who is dwelling among you. There's one law for everybody, not separate laws for everybody. My Moedim. So here's the Sabbath. Work may be done for 6 days, but the 7th day is a Shabbat of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You are to do no work. It is a Shabbat to Yahuwah in all your dwellings. Okay? Now it's going to go through all of the feast days in order. Okay? From the spring to the fall. Okay, so this is Passover. And yes, Shabbat is considered a feast day. It's one that we have once a week to meet with God, to meet with Yahuwah, and rest in His Word. It says Holy Convocation. Holy Convocation insinuates that all of the children of Israel were coming together to worship Yahuwah at the same time. Okay? So, the Passover. These are the appointed feasts of Yahuwah, holy convocations which you are to proclaim at their appointed season. During the first month, now let me just point something out here. It says appointed season. This is why a lot of us spend time trying to figure out the correct calendar, because we want to make sure that we're celebrating these on the correct date. Please don't get caught up too much in the calendars. There's so many calendars. I've studied a lot of them, and honestly, my brain just doesn't. My brain starts to misfire when I start studying the calendar, because my mind doesn't think mathematically, although it does think in numbers a lot. It doesn't think calendarish. I don't know, but the only thing that I don't like about the whole numerous different calendars is that we're all celebrating on different days, and everybody thinks that they're celebrating on the right day. And honestly, like this past year, this past Passover season and unleavened bread, we just worshipped, and celebrated during the time that everybody does with the calendar out of Israel, because I really just missed being together with people during those times. Like, I want to be together with God's people during those times. I don't want to be, one or just a few people celebrating on a calendar that nobody follows. So sometimes I do both. But the only reason it was different last year, if you remember last year, we went to a different calendar because every 3 years, supposedly you add a month. That's done in Judaism anyways. The Hebrew calendar out of Israel adds a month, an extra month every 3rd year anyways, but it wasn't lining up. They did it this year, we did it last year, and it was based on the equinox. So I feel like last year, I felt really confident about it last year. But this year, because we don't add anything, it pretty much lined up with the regular Hebrew calendar that comes out of Israel that everybody celebrates together. So I felt comfortable changing it last year, and this year we just felt comfortable staying in line with everybody else. Okay, so let's continue with Passover. During the first month, on the 14th day of the month in the evening, is Yahuwah's Passover. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of matzah to Yahuwah. For 7 days you are to eat matzah. On the first day you are to have a holy convocation. Remember, that's everybody coming together and worshiping corporately. And you should do no regular work. Instead, you are to present an offering made by fire to Yahuwah for 7 days. And then on the 7th day is another holy convocation where people come together, when you are to do no regular work. So you're supposed to take off the first day and do no work, and the 7th day. All right, now the Feast of First Fruits. Yahuwah said to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel and tell them, when you have come into the land which I give to you, and reap its harvest, then you are to bring the omer of the first fruits of your harvest to the Cohen. He is to wave the omer before Yahuwah to be accepted before you. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the Cohen is to wave it. On the day when you wave the omer, you are to offer a male lamb without blemish, 1 year old, as a burnt offering to Yahuwah." Now, listen, because we're not in the tabernacle or the temple, these offerings don't apply. We would not be offering these offerings because there is no priestly service in a temple. So, of course, a modern rendition of this would be offering monetary tithes. Basically, you're giving tithes and offerings monetarily instead of an animal. The grain offering with it should be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah for a soothing aroma. Its drink offering with it should be 1/4 of a gallon of wine. You are not to eat bread, roasted grain, or fresh grain until the same day, until you have brought the offering of your God. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. In all your dwellings. Okay, so now this is the Feast of Weeks. Then you are to count from the morrow after the Shabbat, so that was first fruits. Then you are to count from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the omer of the wave offering, 7 complete Sabbaths. So we have Passover, that starts unleavened bread, then that leads up to first fruits, and from first fruits, we start counting the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the omer of the wave offering, 7 complete Sabbaths, 49 days. Okay? So that's from Passover to, well, from first fruits to Pentecost, Shavuot. Until the morrow after the 7th Shabbat, you are to count 50 days and then present a new grain offering to Yahuwah. You are to bring out of your houses 2 loaves of bread for a wave offering, made of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour. Then you are to bake with chametz as first fruits to Yahuwah. So now, during this time of Shavuot, you're allowed to have normal bread again that has leaven. Whereas before, you were eating matzah. But this baked bread is a first fruits to Yahuwah. Then you are to present, along with the bread, now this is an offering, this bread, so I don't know that they're actually eating it, 7 one-year-old lambs without blemish, 1 young bull, and 2 rams. They will become a burnt offering to Yahuwah, with their meal offering, their drink offering, and an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahuwah. So they're having a get-together. They're having a barbecue. They are, just celebrating with food, just like we do today. Also, you are to offer 1 male goat for a sin offering and a pair of year-old male lambs for a sacrifice of fellowship offerings. The Kohen is to wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before Yahuwah with the 2 lambs. They should be holy to Yahuwah for the Kohen. See, it's for the Kohen. You are to make a proclamation on the same day that there is to be a holy convocation, and you should not do regular work. So it's saying that on Shavuot, which is Pentecost, you're to have a holy convocation and do no regular work. This is a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout all your generations. Now, when you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap the farthest corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest, but rather you are to leave them for the poor and for the outsider. I am Yahuwah your God. So do you see this again? We saw this law earlier on in Leviticus, but we see this again here because they're going into the land during Shavuot or Pentecost. And this is when they're going to enter the land and they're going to gather all the fruit and the produce in the land. And it says you're not to reap the furthest corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. So basically the corners of your field and anything that drops while you're harvesting, you're to leave for the poor. You see how God is taking care of the poor and for the outsider by them leaving the food here. And now we're moving on to the latter feast days with the Feast of Trumpets. So you typically see this in the fall. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you are to have a Shabbat rest, a memorial of blowing of the shofar, a holy convocation. You're not to do any regular work, and you are to present an offering made by fire to Yahuwah." Okay, so no regular work, presenting an offering, holy convocation, blowing the shofar. It's to be a Shabbat. Then the next one is Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Yahuwah said to Moses, say, however, the 10th day of the 7th month is Yom Kippur, a holy convocation to you. You are to afflict yourselves, and you are to bring an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. Afflicting yourselves is understood to be fasting that day. You are not to do any kind of work on that set day, for it is Yom Kippur to make atonement for you before Yahuwah your God. For anyone who does not deny himself on that day must be cut off from his people. Anyone who does any kind of work on that day, that person will be destroyed from among his people. You should not do any kind of work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It is to be a Shabbat of solemn rest for you, and you are to humble your souls. On the 9th day of the month, in the evening, from evening until evening, you are to keep your Sabbath. And now we see the Feast of Booths. This is the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says, Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Israel and say, on the 15th day of this 7th month is the Feast of Sukkot. For 7 days to Yahuwah. Okay, so this is Sukkot. This is when we dwell in Sukkah. On the first day, there is to be a holy convocation. You are to do no work. Basically, you're taking off a day to celebrate with God. This is why you're not doing any work. Because otherwise you can't be celebrating if you're working. For 7 days you are to bring an offering made by fire. On the first day there's to be a holy convocation. You are to do no laborious work. For 7 days you're to bring an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. The 8th day will be a holy convocation to you. So the first day you don't work and you're supposed to have a holy convocation. And then on the 8th day you're not supposed to work and there's supposed to be a holy convocation. And you're to bring an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. It is a solemn assembly. You should do no laborious work. These are the Moedim of Yahuwah, which you are to proclaim to be holy convocations, to present an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. A burnt offering, a grain offering, a sacrifice, and a drink offering, each on its own day. Besides those of the Shabbaot of Yahuwah, and besides your gifts, all your vows and all your freewill offerings which you give to Yahuwah. So on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered the fruit of the land, you are to keep the Feast of Adonai for 7 days. So the Feast of Sukkot is 7 days. The first day is to be a Shabbat rest, and the 8th day will also be a Shabbat rest. On the first day, you are to take choice fruit of trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leaf trees, and willows of the brook, and rejoice before Yahuwah your God for 7 days. This is the party of all parties. It's a 7-day celebration with Yahuwah during this Feast of Sukkot. You are to celebrate it as a festival to Yahuwah for 7 days in the year. It is a statute forever throughout your generations. You are to celebrate it in the 7th month. You are to live in Sukkot for 7 days. All the native born in Israel are to live in Sukkot, so that your generations may know that I had Israel to dwell in Sukkah when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahuwah your God. So Moses declares to Israel the Moedim of Yahuwah. Okay, there they are. There they are, right there in God's teaching and instructions, all of his holy feast days. These are near and dear to God's heart, and he invites us to celebrate them if we are in covenant with him. This is what he expects us to do. And they're all very specific, and they talk about how when Messiah came during his first during his first coming, when Yeshua was here on the earth, they say that he fulfilled the first feast days, the spring feasts. So the Passover, he was our Passover lamb, first fruits. He was the first fruits unto God who resurrected. Unleavened bread, Yeshua was unleavened bread. He had no sin in him. And then, of course, during Shavuot or Pentecost, that's when the Holy Spirit was poured out. After he had ascended, the Holy Spirit was poured out just like he had promised. And then when he returns for the second time, well, when he comes back, he is going to sort of fulfill, you could say, these fall feasts. He's going to come back with the sound of the shofar during the Feast of Trumpets. During Yom Kippur, that's when the books in heaven are open and, the earth is judged. And then we have Sukkot, which is supposed to be the marriage supper of the Lamb. And it's all very prophetic. All of these days are very prophetic. Then, of course, the Sabbath is the seventh day. Every seventh day, we're resting. And that is also prophetic. That's prophetic of the last 1,000 years in this 7-day. Remember, a day unto God is like 7,000 years. 7,000 years is like a day unto God. So we are still in day 6 because we're in the year 6,000? We're in the 6,000th. We're in the 6,000 years. And that last 1,000 years is the millennial reign, the 1,000 years that Messiah is going to rule and reign on the earth. It's all prophetic. Everything is written right there. Why would we not be celebrating these holy days? All right, so that's chapter 23. We're going to go on to chapter 24. Okay, so 24 says the lamps. Then Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, Order Israel to bring to you pure olive oil, beaten for the light, to keep a lamp burning continually. In the tabernacle and in the temple, there was a light that burned continually. Outside of the curtain of the testimony in the tent of meeting, Aaron is to keep it in order from evening till morning before Yahuwah continually. It is to be a statute forever throughout your generations. He is to keep the lamps in order in the pure gold menorah before Yahuwah continually. So the menorahs that were lit in the tabernacle and the temple, he was charged with keeping them lit. You are also to take fine flour and bake 12 cakes, and with 2/10 of an ephah in each cake. Then you are to set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row on the pure gold table before Yahuwah. Set pure frankincense on each row as a memorial portion for the bread and an offering by fire to Yahuwah. Every Yom Shabbat he is to set it in order before Yahuwah continually. It is an everlasting covenant on behalf of Bnei Israel. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, and they are to eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy unto him among the offerings of Yahuwah by fire, as a perpetual statute. Okay, so this is punishment for blasphemy. Now the son of an Israelite woman, hold on, Marissa says, how are we to celebrate all these nowadays? I'm not a farmer, and because of celiacs, I don't even have wheat, barley, or rye of any kind. I don't have the branches, etc. That's an excellent question. So, I don't eat wheat either. I have celiac as well. And I actually do not recommend that anybody eats any of the modern wheat that we have today. However, I would say, hold on. I don't recommend anybody eat wheat. If you've seen any of my past videos, I talk about how the wheat that we have today is poison. I don't think anybody should eat it. I don't care if you have celiac or not, gluten intolerant or not. It is absolutely not food. However, there are gluten-free matzah. I always buy gluten-free matzah. And that works just fine. There is an ancient wheat that I do recommend. I personally would not eat it because I have celiac, because I just don't want to take any chances. But it's called einkorn wheat. Einkorn. Einkorn wheat is an ancient wheat. It is nothing compared to the wheat we have today. The wheat that we have today has been modernized, hybridized, and completely different structurally, chemically, scientifically. The plant is totally different. So if you are going to make something with wheat, or even if you want to make some bread with wheat, I would recommend using einkorn wheat. That's the only wheat that I would recommend you consuming. Ever. Like ever. I don't recommend anybody to eat modern wheat ever. It's very detrimental to your health, and that's whether you have celiac or not. As far as the branches, during Sukkot we have palm fronds, and you'll see that they're already made up. They have the palm fronds, they have the fruit, the ephod, and you can actually order them online. There's a lot of places that make them during that time. And normally, if you are attending a congregation that typically celebrates Sukkot, then they're already going to have them there. But if you want your own personal one, you can order one online. Or just go, celebrate. If you celebrate, I typically do go to a Messianic congregation during the feast days, and they almost always have the palm fronds there. But I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to celebrate it with a congregation that's celebrating it. To really you have to be around a lot of people during those times. It's called a holy convocation for a reason, so that we're all coming together and celebrating these days appropriately and joyously. Like, especially during Sukkot. You don't want to be, by yourself. Okay, so let's look at punishment for blasphemy. It says, now the son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among Israel, and a fight broke out between the Israelite woman's son, and an Israelite man. Marissa, this is my first year during the feast, so I don't understand quite how to do all this. We unfortunately don't have a Messianic church here. We are pretty alone out here. Oh, you know what? This is one of my favorite rabbis. I lived in Georgia for 3 years, and I attended this congregation, and to this day I still love Rabbi Greg. And I highly recommend you maybe just watching online to the Beth Yeshua congregation. Actually, I'm going to write it in the comments for you. It's they're out of Macon, Georgia. Beth Yeshua International. You can find them on YouTube, and all of the videos are on there. Beth Yeshua International. If you don't have one in your area, Beth Yeshua is wonderful. I love Rabbi Greg and all of his teachings, and they keep the feast days just how we all think we're supposed to. That would be second best. If you can't get to a congregation in your area, then you'll have to find a good one online. But I highly recommend Beth Yeshua International. Okay, so an Israelite woman whose father was an Egyptian. Okay, she goes out among Israel. She's an Israelite woman because her mom is an Israelite and her dad is Egyptian. And a fight broke out between the Israelite woman's son and an Israelite man. The Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name. Now look at this. It says blasphemed the name. This phrase, the name, is why you will hear Jews refer to God as Hashem. Hashem just means the name. And the reason that Jews there's two reasons. Like to call refer to God as Hashem, is they don't want to take a chance in blaspheming God. So they created this tradition or law around God's laws so that they couldn't break the law of blaspheming God's name. So thank you, Tiffany, for posting that. Thank you so much. The Israelite, so they call him Hashem, which is the name, so that they don't have to say his name. But I can guarantee you that when this happened and he blasphemed the name, it was his Yud He Vav He name, and cursed. So they brought him to Moses. So he blasphemed the name and cursed. So they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. So she's from the tribe of Dan. Obviously her father is an Egyptian. And her son blasphemed the name. So they brought him to Moses. And they put him in custody until the will of Yahuwah could be declared to them. Then Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, "Bring the one who cursed out of the camp, and let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and have the entire congregation stone him. Then you will speak to Israel, saying, whoever curses his God will bear his sin." So, again, I don't read this and think that he just cursed God's name, as it is most, because remember, his dad's an Egyptian. Pretty sure he's got some remember, there was a lot of witchcraft. There was a lot of cursing going on that wasn't just curse words, okay? And plus, you have to remember, words back then carried a lot of weight, okay? Blessing and cursing came from the same mouth. So when it says he cursed the name, that to me means that he did something more than just curse, like, or say, GD. I believe that back then it was something much more than that. When it said he cursed the name, it could have been him saying something absolutely inappropriate, possibly. Or maybe he was actually trying to put a curse on God. Because the punishment was for him to be stoned. And then it says, whoever curses his God will bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of Yahuwah will certainly be put to death. The whole congregation must stone him. The outsider, as well as the native born, when he blasphemes the name, is to be put to death. I think I would like to do a little bit more in-depth study of maybe what transpired here, just to know for certain. Blaspheming the name, cursing, whoever curses his God. I feel like he may have actually been trying to curse God. All right, here we go. So this says an eye for an eye. Whoever mortally strikes down any man must surely be put to death. Whoever, okay, so that would be just like today, the death penalty. Whoever mortally strikes down an animal is to make restitution, life for life. So if you kill an animal and it belongs to somebody, you need to make restitution for it. If anyone injures his neighbor, as he has done, the same is to be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Just as he has injured someone, so it shall be done to him. Whoever kills an animal is to make restitution, but the one who kills a man is to be put to death. So if you were to kill a person, obviously that would be capital punishment. Whereas if you were to kill an animal, then you're to make restitution for the animal. You're supposed to give back by giving back one of your animals. You are to have one standard for justice for the outsider as well as the native born. In other words, there is one law, one system of law for everybody. For I am Yahuwah your God. So Moses spoke to Bnei Israel, and they led the one who had cursed out of the camp, then stoned him with rocks. Thus Israel did as Yahuwah commanded Moses. Again, I'm not really for certain that this, I'm not really 100% certain that this was just somebody saying something derogatory. Although back then, just to say something that derogatory towards God was very heavy. I mean, you didn't even, like, think about just a few generations ago. You didn't even talk back to your parents, much less curse God. So although I could leave it and say, I'll have to study this more in depth. Although I could leave it and say that maybe he just said something. But remember, words back then carried much weight, and people didn't just fly off and say whatever they wanted to say. There was a lot of repercussion for what came out of your mouth. Okay, chapter 25. The Sabbath year. Okay, now we're getting into the Shemitah and the Jubilee year. Then Yahuwah said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to Israel and tell them, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land is to keep a Sabbath to Yahuwah." So even the land was to keep a Sabbath. For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather its fruits. But on the 7th year there is to be a Shabbat rest for the land, a Shabbat to Yahuwah. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard. This was to allow the land to rest, because when you plant stuff, when you plant a lot of produce, a lot of trees, it takes all the nutrients out of the ground. I'm pretty sure this is why there was a law for the 7th year for the land to rest, so that the land could recoup, so that it could become vigor again with nutrients and organisms and, bacteria and organisms that live in the soil. Because if you study what's in the soil is living. And if you have dead soil, you're not going to be growing much food. So he's saying that they had to allow the land to rest every 7th year. So let's say you have, now that didn't mean that, I don't think, I'm going to question myself on this, but I don't think it meant everybody's land was resting all at the same time. Maybe you had a plot of land that you let rest while you let this, maybe you alternated between different plots of land resting every 7 years. That I will also have to sort of, what about container gardening? Oh, well, if you're container gardening, you have to replenish your container pretty much every year, because there's not going to be much in it because it's such a small container. But that totally would not apply. I mean, you want to make sure that you're replenishing your container just so you simply can still grow food. But when it comes to this law, this was the land that they were growing on actually resting. So it says, "You are not to reap what grows by itself during your harvest, nor gather the grapes of your intended vine. This is to be a year of Sabbath rest for the land." Again, I'm not really sure if this meant the entire land, or, if maybe they were rotating land. I'm not sure 100%. Marissa says, "Store up like Joseph did for the famine." Yes, they knew how to store food back then. And we also have to remember too, they ate with the seasons. Like if they were going through a season where they couldn't grow, I mean, they knew how to store stuff, they knew how to dry stuff, they knew how to preserve stuff. And there was a lot of grain being used, and grain can be stored for quite some time. And then also they had their sheep and their cattle, and they ate meat. So they had those resources. Also in Israel, there's fish too. So so they did eat meat, but this is allowing the land to rest. We in America do not allow the land to rest. We have pretty much soaked up all the nutrients out of the soil because of this overproduction, and they just keep replanting over and over and over again. Whatever the Shabbat of the land produces will be food for yourself. Okay, so this is what it's saying. It's saying you're going to let the land rest. And whatever the land produces during this 7th year, this will be food for yourself, for your servant, for your maidservant, for your hired worker, or for the outsider dwelling among you. Even for your livestock and for your animals that are in your land, all of its increase will be enough food. This is another principle. When we rest on Shabbat and we don't work, we're not making monetary, we're not making money during the Sabbath. And when this land was resting during this 7th year, he's saying whatever grows during that year by itself, you're going to be able to live on, and the stranger with you, and the animal. This is also having to do with the principle of God sort of training his people to depend on him, because God is the provider. You'll see all throughout the wilderness journey and then on into the land that God wanted his people to depend on him for everything. And he had to train them to do that so that they weren't dependent on themselves. He put these things in place so that they were continuously dependent on him. Tiffany, every 7 years it's commanded to allow the land to rest. All vineyards, all practice this in Israel. Yes, they still practice this in Israel. This is still done. Once they moved into Israel, they started putting these laws into practice since the 1940s. Sorry. So don't plant anything else. Whatever produces during that time that has already been planted is going to be enough. It says all its increase will be enough food. So you just have to depend on Yah. Now we're getting into the Jubilee. So that was the the resting of the land every 7 years. Then you are to count off 7 Shabbatot of years. 7 times 7 years. So that the time is 7 Shabbatot of years, or 49 years. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month, on Yom Kippur, you are to sound a shofar blast. You are to sound the shofar all throughout your land. You are to make the 50th year holy and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It is to be a jubilee to you, when each of you is returned to his own property and each of you is returned to his family. That 50th year will be your jubilee. You are not to sow or reap that which grows by itself, or gather from the untended vines. Since it is a jubilee, it is to be holy to you. You will eat from its increase out of the field. In this year, out of the field. In this year of Jubilee, each of you will return to his property. If you sell anything to your neighbor or buy anything from your neighbor, you are not... Wait, hold on. You're to return... Each of you will return to his property. If you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you are not to wrong one another. Corresponding to the number of years after the Jubilee, you are to purchase land from your neighbor's hand. He is to sell it to you based on the number of years of crops. In proportion to the extent of years, you may increase its price or decrease its price in proportion to the fewness of years, because he is selling a number of harvests to you. See, when they sold land back then, you were selling a farm. Everybody had a farm. There wasn't, one farmer in a group of people. Everybody had land growing something, and they had cattle. You are not to cheat one another, but fear your God, for I am Yahuwah your God. Therefore you are to keep my statutes and observe my ordinances and carry them out, so that you may live securely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you may eat your fill